How do you avoid getting stuck in endless self-analysis? What is the difference between self-digging and self-observation? What is the role of understanding in the life of psychotherapy? We'll talk about this and much more in this video. Hello, my dear friends. It's me again, Igor Pogodin. And today we have quite an interesting topic. I've been practicing psychotherapy for many years, and almost every person who comes to me for therapy, if I ask them, what do you think, how do you see the process of psychotherapy? Do you have any experience? They say, no, I don't have any experience. And how do you see psychotherapy, for example? They say, well, we will look for the causes of my problems, my symptoms, illnesses, and suffering. And when we find this cause, I will understand and start living differently. And this answer is as far from reality as possible, at least from what I do in psychotherapy. Yes, I know that many of my colleagues work precisely by relying on understanding, even if they cultivate in their posts, in their speeches, and perhaps in their articles and books, the value of self-observation and awareness. In practice, they quite often rely specifically on knowledge about oneself. Consecration. Specifically on consciousness as the informational component in their lives, into which understanding is already integrated, because in order for us to know what is happening to us, it seems to us that we must understand. That's why, for some reason, we constantly find ourselves in this endless self-examination. Or, for example, many years ago, a client came to me and said, I know everything about myself. He already had 5 years of therapy background with several therapists. He comes in and says, I know everything about myself, but for some reason I still suffer. It turned out that all those years in therapy, he was collecting knowledge about his unhappiness. In reality, understanding the nature of your unhappiness and your problems in life, as well as trying to figure out the reasons, isn't worth a damn. Moreover, they are actually quite dangerous. Why? Because this leads to what is sometimes called completed gestalt in everyday language. A familiar situation, when you're feeling bad, you're in some state of confusion or frustration. And then you suddenly realize why you ended up in this trap. Someone told you about it, maybe your therapist, or you figured it out during a conversation with a friend, or you uncovered it yourself. And so, you feel relieved. And if before you still had the chance to change, at the moment you calm down, you now know why your life is such a mess. Why change? You might not consciously think, why change? But your motivation has dropped significantly. Then, of course, problems start piling up again, and you want to get rid of them once more. Each time, understanding what's happening deprives you of the prospect of change. And that's a big, big problem. It is for this reason that the basis of Gestalt therapy, for example, is based on the principle of awareness instead of understanding the situation. Awareness, unlike understanding, is closer to another verb in the language, which is to notice. To be aware means to notice. Not to understand, but to notice, to feel that difference. In other words, the point is that when we try to understand something, we invent a reason for what is happening. When we try to notice something, we always start to see something new, something fresh. Why do people change? People change because something new enters their lives. New phenomena, new feelings they didn't know before, new bodily sensations, new desires, needs, new thoughts. This doesn't happen with understanding. The process of understanding is like digging through archives or a library. When I was writing my dissertation, I remember that the lion's share of my life, when I was writing it, I spent in libraries, reading other people's dissertations and monographs. This was so that I could first try to find out what had already been discovered, then put forward my own hypothesis, and then test that hypothesis. In reality, the problem with this when it comes to life is that you're trying to use old knowledge to create, well, as a kind of compilation, a semblance of new knowledge. But in reality, you'll only be dealing with a new edition of old knowledge about yourself. That is, when you try to understand something, you always end up feeling reassured, but just as hungry as before. Because in fact, you haven't gained anything new. New things do not come into your life through self-examination. New things do not come into your life through understanding the causes of your problems. But how can that be, you say? If I understand the causes of my problems, I'll stop acting that way. Yes, of course, but it doesn't work like that. At best, which happens in about 5% of cases, you use willpower to reshape yourself. But even in that case, there's a problem. 95% of people won't do anything at all after understanding themselves. But those 5%, or even if we expand that to 50%, those people who try to change something in their lives through understanding, they will rely on willpower. As a result, all they can hope for is to rework the old concept into something that at best merely pretends to be new, but it will still be the same concept. Many schools, approaches, and branches of psychotherapy are built on this. When old concepts are taken, compiled or modified, or even confronted and reworked, built in opposition, and thus a new concept appears. But for some reason, this does not lead to change. Why? Because you haven't seen anything new. You simply, in fighting the previous concept, created what seems to be a new one, which in reality is just a revision of the previous one. Look at people who have decided that their lives will not be like their parents. Things aren't so bad for them. I will live differently, a happier, freer life. And in this protest against your parents, you really did start building your life according to new concepts in a completely different way. But 20 years later, you see that you are in the same place as they were. Why? Because counterdependence is still dependence. Because the attempt to reconstruct a concept revolutions have never led to anything good, no matter how heroic they may have been. Because a revolution always creates a new concept. Not only was there always a lot of blood, pain, and human suffering in it, but it also simply deformed the world into new, absurd, crooked, and skewed shapes. People do not develop through revolution. People do not develop through the transformation of concepts. That's why understanding is a prize for fools. As Luke Reinhardt describes, inspired by the Erhard seminar training. Some attribute this phrase to Fritz Perls, but in my opinion, it belongs to Erhard or Reinhardt. Understanding is a prize for fools. Indeed, Fritz Perls has many such phrases. He called all theorizing bullshit. And depending on whether it was an explanation of one's own behavior, he called it chicken shit. If he was philosophizing about the nature of one's life, it was bullshit. Or if it was philosophizing about the structure of the world, it was elephant shit. Fritz Perls didn't seem to like explanations very much. Well, they say that he threw the baby out with the bathwater, because with this kind of understanding, people started fighting against all concepts. But that's a problem too. Concepts don't get in your way. Not theoretical concepts, not psychotherapy model concepts, not your personal concepts, not family concepts, not the concepts of your culture, subculture, or community. They don't get in your way, but they are not you. So instead of all that, friends, the task is to stop digging into yourself. So what should you do instead? Instead, discover awareness. And awareness, as I've already said, is very close to the verb to notice. And that's where curiosity and wonder arise. Why do curiosity and wonder appear? Because something truly new emerges. Not in the sense that you already knew it for a long time, but that you notice something new. It could be something smaller, new feeling you hadn't noticed before, a new need, a new desire, something new in the way another person looks at you when you're interacting, something new in your husband or wife as you're talking to them right now. You might have been ready to argue, but then you notice this new thing in their tone or movements. Because in reality, we try this newness. It's always there. It's there all the time, every second. We try to fit this newness into old concepts. That's why we get hurt by interpretations, argue over interpretations, have conflicts, quarrel over interpretations, kill because of our interpretations, destroy relationships because of our interpretations, wage wars, start revolutions because of our interpretations. If you notice something new in your husband, your relationship will start to change. This revolution, a micro-revolution, a true transformation, can happen through observing something new without trying to interpret it. In understanding, you will always be interpreting. In awareness, this new thing won't simply fit into what already exists. You will also try to somehow force it in. But if you start seeing a lot of new things, for example, Fritz has this beautiful phrase, let the world make an impression on you. The ability to be surprised and to be curious is key. If you become curious, you will start to change. If you become genuinely curious, you will start to change. Who am I? You already have answers to these questions. Approach it from not knowing. I'll record a separate video. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Are you sure? Open your heart, open your ears and eyes. Try to discover something new in your relationships with your partner, with your children, at work, within yourself, with your body. Start. And this newness will begin to change you. Understanding doesn't change things. The old doesn't change. So If you notice that you've gotten stuck in some kind of self-examination, self-exploration, or self-analysis, then ask yourself, what new have you actually seen? After all, it's nothing but new interpretations. Isn't that right? Why? Because your mind is occupied. You're looking in the wrong direction. You're sitting in the archives. But your task is to look at the world. And when you open up the world, say what new things I noticed in this relationship, in this conversation in which I am now. What new thing have I noticed in my communication with my colleagues? What new thing have I noticed in my own breathing? Here I am, sitting and drinking a cup of coffee in the morning. But what new thing have I noticed right now? What new things have slipped past me? I assure you, hundreds of thousands of potential phenomena at the same time do not catch your attention. Why aren't you looking in that direction? That's why you live in a world that keeps unfolding according to the script of Groundhog Day. It is governed by concepts. And when you start to notice something new, a revolution will begin to happen. These new phenomena will appear, which will contradict all your old ideas about yourself. You will find yourself in a certain crisis. I call this a managed, initiated crisis of psychotherapy. You will find yourself confused, and this confusion will start to change you. It is not information that changes you, but confusion. But you run away from confusion, don't you? Because it burns. Disaster, disaster. No, this is wonderful. Not knowing confusion, that's wonderful. I'll record a separate video about this. So move towards awareness, not towards self-digging. It will never help you. But usually, in order to move towards awareness, you need either a tremendous amount of experience. Then start with simple things, just simple things in your life. When you sit and simply observe, look out the window. What new things do I notice right now in my body, in my feelings, in my desires, in what I observe, in my attitude towards what I observe? Let's move on. You're chopping carrots for borscht. What new thing do I notice right now? Your little son runs up. What new thing do I see right now? Went for a walk. I'm walking. What have I not noticed before? But now suddenly catches my attention, starting from simple things. But even in this case, of course, you will still tend to look where your consciousness is directed by your concepts. That's why quite often, in the vast majority of cases, in order for a person to regain their awareness, they need another person or guide, someone who can look in that other direction. Ideally, this guide should be a trained psychotherapist. At the very least, it should be a conscious, attentive person, even if they are not a psychotherapist. That's why in conversation with them, you'll be able to see this new thing. Because if you keep digging inside yourself, you'll just be rummaging through your own archives, as I've already mentioned. So either go to psychotherapy or join some kind of group therapy or participate in developmental programs like ours. We offer all of these options. If you're interested in individual therapy, you can message me directly on any social network, Instagram, Facebook, or Telegram if you have my contact information. As for the group, I leave links here, leave your contact details, and our staff will get in touch with you to explain how all of this can work in your life and whether it's right for you. Or find someone who is genuinely curious, truly curious about your life and not trying to change you, but asking you about your life. And together with this person, to some extent, though, of course, they can't replace psychotherapy. You'll be able to try noticing something new about yourself. And then another truth emerges, a major difficulty without psychotherapy. And it becomes even harder to manage without it. How can you integrate what you've just become aware of into your life? Because if you don't have such a person nearby, you'll face a crisis. And most likely you'll either get rid of these new phenomena, push them out of your awareness, or this crisis will be very painful for you. Your quality of life will decrease here. If you've never felt anger before, and now you suddenly feel it, what are you going to do with it? You'll either reject it, or let it poison you, or start lashing out with your anger at everyone around you, damaging your relationships. None of these options are very productive. That's why, in fact, you need psychotherapists, some kind of professional guys by your side. But if you don't rush, you can do this yourself to a limited extent. But still, this anger has appeared. Observe it. Don't be in a hurry to bring it into your interactions. What is this anger telling you? How is it speaking to you? What do you notice besides anger? Because in reality, your anger may have arisen as some kind of reactive formation. You were actually scared, or you felt ashamed, but you didn't realize the shame or fear. And instead, to cope with them, you felt anger. You see how complicated it all is? So if you don't try to quickly act everything out or react, but simply notice this emotion, if you notice that you were actually frightened, if you become aware of your fear, give it a chance to speak. You'll discover that at the root of this fear are certain thoughts. Discuss this with some close people who won't try to rescue or comfort you. And you notice that fear has no power and the anger has disappeared. Do you see how this works? That's basically the story. This is what awareness is, as opposed to self-analysis. You don't need that. Mindfulness and presence can truly change your life. Try it, give it a try, and you'll succeed. It may not be the fastest way, but it's worth it. It took me a decade. For most of my students, it takes a few years. So give it a try. There's no reason not, a single reason not to try. Thank you. With love to you, yours, Igor Pogodin. See you in new videos. Bye.